Oh, it's not recording. Now it is. Got the intuition and got Jerry wasn't on the ball again. Blame it. Oh, it's Mark's fault. We'll blame it on the Libra. We're blaming everything else on Libra tonight. Shakespeare hooked us into the Hamlet kind of thinking through the play within a play. He brought us to realize the principle of analogy, which is understood in the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below. What has gone before in heaven will follow after on earth. Know this and rejoice. When we once realized that principle of analogy, we were no longer just studying a play. We were studying a play, or we were living in a play where the players themselves within the play were being self-conscious by watching a play. There is a contra-irony in all of this, because the players in the play within the play lose their self-consciousness, as the player did that Hamlet refers to when he says, "Who is he to Hecuba, and Hecuba to him?" They're so immersed in the play that they lose sight of themselves, just like we get immersed in our lives and lose sight of ourselves in our petty little dramas. So we find ourselves extremely self-conscious of the fact that we are players in something much, much larger. And we were tricked into this awareness by Shakespeare, very much the way that Oedipus was tricked into a self-conscious, deeper discovery by pondering on the riddle of the Sphinx. He answered it in a general sense, but more and more as he continued on, he found that it was very specific in his life. However, the trick that Shakespeare has played on us is very benign. It's fulfilling the higher duty of an artist. And the higher duty of an artist is to edify people, to wake them up in enlightenment. Since it is benign, it's likely to be psychologically good for our health, our psychological health. And so let's immerse ourselves into the myths as analogies again, and let's do it in a different way. And just call the mind the whole play and find out where it brings us. When I do that, I find myself in a much different circumstance. In a warm place, I find myself. The story begins in a womb, a wide, expansive womb of space. It is the womb of Nut, or of Nut. And she is the wife and the sister of Seb. And in Greek, Nut and Seb are Rhea and Kronos. In this womb, there are 5 sibling gods gestating. Their names are Horus the Elder, Nephthys, Set, Isis, and Osiris. In this womb, even before they're born, Isis finds Osiris and they fall in love. They're brother and sister, but if their father and mother were brother and sister, it doesn't make any difference. They unite in the womb, and Isis finds herself pregnant before she's even born. The five gods are all born on 5 intercalary days. The Egyptians had a 360-day year. They had 12 months or 12 signs of the zodiac, each of which was 30 degrees long. And it's hinted that Nut was forbidden to give birth on any day of any month. And so what happens is that the Egyptian Hermes gets into a dice game with Re, and he wins so many minutes off of each of the other 360 days, and he gets 5 intercalary days, the 5 days of Christmas. And so they're each born on those days. There are all kinds of juicy details. We're going to skip almost all of the details of the story because we'd be here for weeks. At any rate, the firstborn is Osiris, and he becomes king. The firstborn of the 2 goddesses, Isis and Nephthys, is Isis, and after birth she becomes wife and queen to Osiris. Sometime after her birth, she gives birth to a son that had been conceived while she was in the womb of Nut. In this story, it's really interesting because instead of having a play within a play, we have a womb within a womb. And it's sort of like while you're gestating one idea, within that other idea, there are other gestations going on. I lived at one time with a composer, and he was also a jazz musician, and he was writing this thing that was for orchestra, guitar, and voice, and it was a magnum piece. And while he was writing that, within the writing of that, he came up with all these little ditties that became jazz pieces at the same time, and something of that nature. She names her son Horus, but to differentiate this Horus from his uncle, this is called Horus the Younger, while the first Horus is called Horus the Elder. This younger Horus is sometimes called a hawk, and he is sometimes called the Avenger. He's called that because he climbs and dives with the sun. The sun was the eye of Horus, the hawk, and he climbs every day and he avenges the day from the night which has given us darkness. And he does that each day. The divisions of his ascent and dive were named after him, and they are our hours, which are named after Horus. And the astrological charts that were made in each of those divisions were called horoscopes, which is where the words come from. Again, we're going to have to abbreviate a lot of other things. I've already twice done this myth in a number of talks each time, and each time it was different. But at any rate, Osiris had a glorious career. He conquered most of the world, and he conquered it more by culture than by might. But somewhere along the way, his red-headed, ape-like or donkey-like brother Set becomes jealous of him, and he becomes covetous of his wife, his wealth, and his power. And what happens is that Set builds this box, and he says, I wonder whether anybody can perfectly fit into this casket. Osiris, being good-natured and good-hearted, steps into the casket and lies down in it, and it fits him perfectly. Immediately, On command from Set, his henchmen closed the casket, they hasp it shut, and they eventually seal it totally with molten lead. At some other time in the story, which is a really foreshortened story, some other time Set actually slays Osiris and cuts his body into 14 pieces, which he distributes in various places around Egypt. One of them actually thrown into the river and goes to the fishes. And some of the fishes actually eat some of it, and those fishes were taboo for humans to eat in Egypt. The mourning Isis has a long, arduous journey, looking first for Osiris and then later on collecting all of the pieces. Now, some of the episodes of this journey are almost identical to the episodes of Demeter when she looks for Persephone. And Persephone, we're saying that the cycle of nature of the ethers coming out and then retracting back into the earth, that is the cycle of Persephone. So that this myth also is relevant to that same cycle. Eventually, Osiris is resurrected, but he's only resurrected in a ghostly spirit form, and he becomes cyclically resurrected, and he rules the underworlds. He rules the dead, among other things. When this takes place, Set becomes something of a renegade, a tyrant on the outskirts of civilization. And Isis never regains her previous glory, or certainly not her previous joy. She protects the remains of Osiris, and strangely she forms an uneasy alliance with Set. Somewhere along the line, Osiris, as a ghost or as a spirit, appears out of the invisible to Horus. And through a series of riddles, he fans the flame of revenge, and he prepares Horus for the coming battles with Set. Eventually, they have one grand battle, and Horus wins, and he delivers up, he binds up Set and delivers him to Isis. Now, literary scholars claim that there are only a finite number of plots for literature, for stories. It's not an agreed upon number, but the actual number of plots is rather small. And there's a lot of controversy about exactly how many there are. But that's what happens with academics. They're not filled with mystical purpose or with creative purpose, and so they expend enormous amount of resources on controversial scholarship, like how many plots are there, or who is Shakespeare really. Now, the number in spiritual things in quality is very important. Going all the way back to the Pythagoreans, each number has a quality, but number in quantity, as in how many themes there are, is relatively unimportant. What matters is what we do with the themes. The creative spirit can come to things that are repeated again and again, almost to infinity, and each time it goes through those same cycles, those same repetitions, something new and wondrous comes out. that's because the Spirit is filled with life and it's filled with love, and that's what Spirit does, is it creates. If we think about it, music is a matter of a very few simple elements, and they are compounded together in wondrously beautiful ways. And even the same pieces of music, we can play them over again and again, and each time we do, there's something new about them. Anyway, beyond the ranting and raving about scholars, it's pretty obvious that the story of Isis and Osiris is almost identical with the plot of Hamlet. It's amazing how many details are common between the two stories, even right down to the ghost of Osiris appearing to his son and getting him to revenge. Now, Shakespeare certainly must have known about this. But what's really, this is really proof, though, because what Hamlet did was take a story that is at least 2,000 years old and maybe 10,000 times more than that if we can believe the ancient Egyptians. And he took that story, and it was still relevant for Hamlet thousands of years later. So we have a very simplistic answer of who is Hamlet. From this point of view, Hamlet, in the language of the gods, is Horus. Horus the Avenger. Like last time we saw that Hamlet was Kronos, or Hamlet was Enlodi. Horus the Avenger of his father's murder by his father's brother, which brother has subsequently aligned himself with the mother of Horus. Now, all that remains is one simple little question. What does all of this mean, now that we know who he is? We'll try to answer that a little bit tonight, and we'll try to answer it in terms of aspiration and in terms of mysticism and in terms of the cycles that we've been talking about in these talks all along. These are not meant to be standard answers for academics or anything like that. As I mentioned before, twice before, once almost 10 years ago, I tackled the Isis myth from the viewpoint of mythology, and I tackled it as a creation myth and as a mystery myth. I think Paul was the only person that was there for that first rendition. And then about, 3 years ago, something like that, I did it again. But each time, previously, the myth of Isis and Osiris has been a whole series of talks. And each time it was different than what it is going to be tonight. I suppose I could go back to that myth and do a series a year for a few years and still not exhaust it. Because Plutarch, who recorded the myth better than the Egyptians did, in his rendition of telling the story, it's just filled with all sorts of mystery information. Plutarch was an initiate into the mysteries of Isis and Osiris by the Greeks. Pluto was an initiate into the mysteries of Apollo. Plutarch was an initiate into the Eleusinian mysteries and into the Orphic mysteries. 4 different mystery schools he was initiated into, and at least one of them, the Apollinine school of the mysteries, he was a Hierophant. So he really knew the stuff, and he really packed it all in there. This rendition tonight will be very, very brief, and it will be very skeletal, and it mystic seers say that the region of ideation or abstract thought is the deepest one can go into the spiritual realms and still have some specific differentiation. All of the realms beyond that are called realms of pure spirit. They have no limitation. The region of ideational thought is sometimes called the region of the human spirit or the region of the Holy Ghost. And a baptism by the Holy Ghost or into the Holy Ghost is in many ways identical to the experience of intuiting and conceiving a universal idea. A universal idea is spiritual in that it is universal. It applies everywhere, every time. It is specific or not purely spiritual in that it has its own internal limitations. Now, mystic seers claim that the deepest realm, sub-realm, within the region of ideational thought is the region of ideas about fundamental form, about geminal or germinal form. And those ideas about form are mathematical ideas. In spiritual mathematics, there is a language that approaches symbolism. And that language is so deep that it goes almost beyond verbalization. And mystical mathematicians say things that are not profound in the complexity, like studying set theory or studying topology or something like that, but they're much more simple. They're deceptively simple, like those very simple principles out of which music is created. For example, the manifest projection of thought is called a line. And the least number of direct projected lines of thought that measure space, or universal space, they define it objectively, and para objectively. The least number of lines that do that are 3. The whole universe is defined in the triangle. That's the object that is the reference for the entire universe. So that para-triangularly, the rest of the universe is defined at the same time the triangle is defined. So, the triangle is the simplest figure in any number of dimensions of space to objectively and directly represent the spirit through its projection. That's the bare bones of the triangle as a mathematical figure. From a viewpoint of spirit, the spirit has character. The reality of spirit is character. The character of that spirit comes out in triangular myths. Isis, Osiris, and Horus obviously represent character of spirit in a triangular myth, the same myth that is used in Hamlet. When you bring Set Or when you bring Claudius into the story, it becomes a double triangle, where you have Hamlet the elder, Gertrude, Hamlet the younger, and Claudius producing a double triangle. Or you have Osiris, Isis, Horus, and Set producing a double triangle. There are a number of ways that you can represent double triangles. You can represent them in the hourglass figure. You can represent them in the Star of David. You can represent them in the adamantine diamond body. You can even represent them, if they're right triangles, you can represent them in the square as the building process. So each has a different meaning. Each shows a different stage of the creative activity of double triangles. The difference, for example, between the diamond and the square is almost like the difference between diamond carbon, being the diamond-shaped interaction, whereas the square interaction is more like soot, carbon as soot. Same stuff, just a different formation. If we take a simple equilateral triangle, upright, the apex, the very top, represents the first principle, the divine spirit, Father of the will. To our left, but from the inside out, at the right hand of the Father, is the life spirit. The second principle, the mother or the imagination. The final vertex is the third principle, the Horus principle, the individual, the human spirit, the self, the thinker. But the language can change depending on how it's put together. For example, if we invert the triangle, it has a different meaning in mystical mathematics. In that sense, the base that is at the top, the horizontal limb, represents the subsistent Father, the divine spirit that brings it all about while seeming to just lay there in a static and eternal kind of posture. Very much like the fixed signs that represent that first attribute of spirit. Unchangeable, just laying there. The two lines that proceed downward represent the paradoxical principles, the paradoxical opposites that carry out the will of the subsistent Father. Everything in the second principle is paradoxical. We mentioned it last time. He said that it was where rational mathematical surety met with chance in the supra-rational. So there's that paradoxical pair. The inverted vertex is the human spirit, the third principle. It is in that point that the Father and the Mother are focused. They are pure spirit. This is focused to a point, the Horus point, the self, the focused light that becomes like a sun as we see it below. That point is the Hamlet point. It is where subsistent being in the first two principles becomes a being. Very important thing. And in becoming a being, a self, something that you can point to in consciousness, that is Horace the Avenger, or Hamlet the Avenger. Rather than using the word avenger, vindicator would probably be a better word. Because vindication is not necessarily destructive or deathly. And it isn't vengeful. But it is where there is final satisfaction. What the Spirit had in it invisibly, especially in the Father, becomes manifest in that focus. So that it is the epitomization of Spirit in a being, a separate being. This was a human, to use the words of Hamlet. So it goes to from a general spirit to an objectification, a specific focus. That specific or that specification could never happen in pure spirit, which is always subsistent. The will is that each and every one of us be vindications of the divine. So each and every one of us, if we're painfully in the lower self-consciousness, the self-consciousness of Hamlet, each of us bears the weight of the universal spirit. Self-becoming is our divine duty. However, this activity of self-becoming, of being vindications, of being ignited sparks of the divine doesn't have to be heavy like it is with Hamlet. We actually even have a promise that my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And if we're truly in the Spirit, it is that way. We want to understand why it is heavy for Hamlet. So let's do that by contemplating the double triangle. Let's add to the first triangle the lower triangle. Reduces the hourglass in 2 dimensions, which is perfectly suited for dealing with Saturn, because Saturn rules the hourglass. When your time has run out, Saturn, as the angel of death, comes with the sigh and the hourglass. If we look at the hourglass figure, it's a perfect representation of us and our cosmos as it is right now in evolutionary time. The Spirit has just begun, the transcendent, the noumenal has just begun to touch the phenomenal. And it's beginning to look outward. And it is that touching point that is the Horace Hamlet point. This is the crux point we discussed last time in a different way as the mill pole. It's not a pole now, it's a point. And it is a point right in the heart of the mind. The place where the concrete mind meets the ideational mind. The mercurial, concrete mind is in its Saturnine stage, just as we saw last time. It is the focusing agent between the personality and the individuality or spirituality. It is through this lens of mind that the attributes of the Spirit are focused into the character of matter, into the world of matter. And because it is a focal point or a focal lens, the deepest spiritual plane, the plane of the divine spirit, or the Osiris plane, gets focused down to the physical earth, the Set plane. So the will, the inviolable will, becomes the great resistance of the dense matter that we are in. Set is described as a rude, rough, red person, like the earth is red or brown. This is just a dirty red. And it's filled with base Saturnian attitudes. This is what it means for Osiris to be put in the casket. It means that the deepest attribute of the Spirit, the most universal attribute, is locked into the most small limitations. The casket fits him perfectly. And he's sealed in by lead, the basest of the base materials. In Paracelsus' chart of the metals, lead represents the dense physical earth, whereas gold represents even beyond the human spirit. So we're locked, like Osiris, almost as much in materialism through instinct as Osiris is. In our materialism, we think like Claudius. We think we can get away with what nobody can see. And we all keep the forms like the puppet of Claudius, Polonius, all of those proprietary forms. The decimation, or the quad decimation of Osiris, is the atomization, or the separative kind of consciousness. The universal wisdom is broken up into all of those little specialties, all those separate ways of looking at things that scientists are carried away with. The two lower legs of the triangle are the Isis principle in inversion in the so-called soul worlds. They represent the etheric and the desire nature. They work together, and they're also divided. They're very much like Gertrude. Now motivating, now nurturing and restoring. We alternate between the consciousness of the desire body, which eggs us on to do things, and the vital body, which tries to maintain all the homeostases and repair the physical and never have it change. So it shouldn't surprise us at all that Isis in inversion lines herself up with Set. It's the nature of the second to always support and to nurture and to protect. It's the very thing that keeps our dense body safe. Separative things require support. It's not like in the spirit where everything is subsistent. The genetic integrity of physical bodies, of the bodies of Set, or the bodies of Claudius, requires integrity so that the lessons needed can be learned. In early human history, hundreds and thousands of years ago, when people could only learn specific lessons through specific kinds of cultures and specific kinds of racial bodies, because they weren't ready for individuation, it was a common practice that if a man died, his wife married his brother. Common practice. We find it in the Old Testament. It is in this way that the memory that is in the DNA, which is really not in the stuff, it's more in the Issachaic ethers than it is in the stuff. But Hamlet, even more than Horace, is not one of the crowd. He represents individuation. This racial partitioning, cultural partitioning, linguistic partitioning, to him, he's disgusted by them. He sees it as a lack of faith in his mother. By his own words, he's tired of the uses of the world. He's trying to rise above the world, and he's modern like us, and he's trying to do it by aspiration as we're trying to do it. However, he's forced to respect the outer world. The whole play shows us that if we're inwardly weak and lack the vigilance, we surrender to the without, and we would soon be overwhelmed and petrified by it if we weren't inwardly vigilant. In his own way, Horace is vindicating his father Osiris in more ways than just being the son of his father. He's remembering him, just as Hamlet remembers his father, Hamlet the Elder. Mind. Oh, we're going along really fast. It's not going to take a whole long. What? No, it's going well. He's constantly reassembling him and putting him together or holding him in his own consciousness. Hamlet does what he does in remembrance of his father. Like Hamlet, we are also semi-asleep in matter and in materialism. Plato has this in the dialogue called the Meno. Socrates takes this child off the street and he proves a theorem about an isosceles right triangle. And Plato had the whole idea that education was memory, remembering. But it wasn't remembering of fact. It was remembering of intuition. At each step along the way, the kid off the street is asked to remember himself. What does he intuitively think about this? How many times do we start out in the morning and say, today I'm going to have the perfect day? And how many times during the day do we say, I forgot myself? Hamlet would like to forget himself. He's heavy. And he even considers doing it completely. To be or not to be speech is an outright suicide speech. We're a little further along in some ways that we realize that we have burdens of material responsibility and that if we're not careful, we're going to fall asleep. I've seen it happen to many striving people that they fell asleep. Beside the burdens and responsibilities of the material world, we have to remember to stay awake in the spirit. and into intuition. And even though my burden is light and my yoke is easy, it seems like too much. It seems like too much if we take it egotistically. In this figure, the Horace-Hamlet point is like the Libra point. It's the turning point, as we noted last time. Only we don't see it only as the turning point of involution turning around to evolution. We see it as a fulcral turning point between spirit and matter in evolution. In actuality, that point in the mind is more than just a point, it's a lens, and it's a mirror. The upper surface reflects and looks into the divinely conceived self in the ideational mind. And that ideational mind is expansive. And it has the nature of evolution that we were talking about last time. The lower surface of the mind is the concrete mind. And its function is Saturnian concentration, selfishness, like the river Nile. You go one direction, you go upstream and you become divine. You go downstream, you become human. It's involutionary, the lower face. And it is on that lower face, the ego side, that we find Hamlet being stuck. He's world weary, and he's locked in a lot of concrete thought, but not so much that he doesn't know it. And he calls it, there's nothing, being sicklied by thought. He would like to be decisively active like Horace, but he's not there yet. One of the ironic things about this is that one of the few things that will get him to becoming decisive like Horace is thought. The self, the higher divine part of our being, is awakened every time it uses the general power of the will to focus and to think. It becomes stronger and it becomes more awake in itself. If we are thinking correctly, we are aware of the process that we are thinking, and we become self-conscious in the higher sense of the word, in the divine sense. Hamlet is selfishly preoccupied in the lower ego. And all of those petty, repetitive, automatic lower reflections that we call thoughts, kinds that Krishnamurti says that's not thinking. So he's a prisoner of half thought. It probably would have done him good to love Ophelia, not sex her, but love her, and get out of the, personal, egoistic preoccupation. So we can say of Hamlet, he is asking the question to be or not to be, when he should really be stating, I am that I am. He should be in that divine higher self-being. There is one respect in which the story of Horace is significantly different from the story of Hamlet. It is continuous and it is ongoing, even now. When Horace conquers Set, he binds him up, and he presents him to his mother to dispatch him. But since the support and source of life is a redeemer and a preserver, whether it's in the life spirit or its reflection in the ethers, it can't kill. Its whole being is giving life. And so Isis releases Set, and Horus is furious. And the whole cycle starts all over again. Horus has to go out, pick up a new army, and he has to fight with Set all over again. One of the problems with us in our fallen materialism is that we have developed an attitude of been there, done that, or that once is enough. That would really be nice if we could learn things in one instance and we wouldn't have to repeat them. That really is the Saturn way. Once is enough. But once isn't enough for our selfishness, our hard-headedness, and our trying to get away with something, and we make the same dumb mistakes over again and again. Even if we are unselfish in this material world, some things are hard. And we're working very awkwardly through this one point, so to speak. And some things are hard to learn to do. And beyond the mere personal lessons, there are all the things of the world. This is a great work, and it's not just a school that we pass through. All of the body of Osiris has to be remembered. And all of Set has to be redeemed. And there's a lot in the material world, and we're all working on it, each in our way. If we wish to graduate into the Isisaic ethers, we have to have rich etheric bodies, and they must be organized. And that means regular, rhythmic, repetitive cycles of activity. Minute after minute, hour after hour, day after day, year after year, rebirth after rebirth, all of those kinds of repetitive cycles. In these talks, we've been talking about two cycles. The cycle of Persephone and the concurrent cycle of Christ incarnating into the earth. We left off on the cycle of Persephone at A Midsummer Night's Dream. And we discussed the summer solstice in an etheric way. We felt all of the joy of fruitfulness and success. We had made something. Persephone had been returned from imprisonment in the underworld, and she had risen to her height of glory. She was the queen of life, and all of nature was just plush with foliage and flowers and fruits. It was a time of celebration by the fairies and by the people who work hard every day. And even the aristocrats were celebrating. However, the rose does not always stay in bloom. Success and celebration of success aren't the all any more than the fruit is the whole plant. The whole plant is a cycle from seed to seed. To dwell on success right. It's a very great selfish sin. The disciples were commanded to not build tabernacles on the Mount of Transfiguration. If we say, let this moment live forever, Mephistopheles has our soul just as he had the soul of Faust when we say those words. If we are selfishly preoccupied with success and with celebration, we die spiritually. We die resting on our laurels. The wages of sin is death. There is one very hard thing about doing talks like this. It isn't all the hours of preparation, which are actually a joy. And it isn't the presentation, because that's very exhilarating and exciting. It isn't even doing a poor job, because doing a poor job spurs you on to do better the next time. What is very hard is the emptiness when it's over. Whether it's good or whether it's bad, if one has given oneself, one is empty when it's over. There's always a temptation to celebrate and indulge even in the emptiness. But if you do that, the seeds of vice get planted dangerously deep in your soul nature. It's more than a time of tiredness or fatigue. It's a spiritual emptiness, and it's a void. When I first started doing talks, I thought this was unique to me. And I find it's a general thing. Hermann Hesse writes of it in the novel Narcissus and Goldman. Goldman, every time he has done a creation, has that same kind of emptiness. And he makes the mistake of trying to fill it with pleasure. It's real, and it's deep, and it's good. It's very good if you learn how to deal with it. It's like our eventual return to the world of thought in the post-mortem journey after we die. That experience is called the Great Silence. Our personality has been purged of desire, both positive and negative, and it's suspended naked and empty in the void that permeates the vacuum, that permeates thoughts. And one is totally alone with one's mind. Everything is silent. The duration of the time is immaterial, but ever so slowly something gradually is born. Something new comes creeping in because we are empty and open. There can be people around that have duties to do, but the emptiness is there just the same. Over the years, I'm sure you have the same kinds of experiences, but what I'm learning over the years is that the very best thing to do is to volitionally enter that, and with gratitude and anticipation, listen for the faint murmurs of the word. They may come, they may not come. This is not an exclusive human phenomenon. Everything is subject to this phenomenon. It's part every cycle of manifestation. Everything gets tired and it has to withdraw and relax and rest and listen with intuition. Even sometimes things have to die to be born anew. Hamlet didn't make it as an initiate. He had to do what he had to do and die and be reborn and try again. Even initiation, if one is successful, has the same principle. Going through that experience is called a little death, when we learn to leave our bodies. Similarly, the Persephonic ethers withdraw beneath the surface of the earth. This occurs in Libra, where the sun is in its fall, and Saturn, as we have noted, is exalted. The reaper comes with the sickle, figuratively and literally, and everything gets mown down. The wheat and the tares get mown down. Almost all of vegetative nature is like the last scene of Hamlet. Everybody gets mowed down. Time, once again, in its cycle, has slain its own children. For us, it's a time of separating the wheat from the tares and further sifting and winnowing to take away the germs that are useful from the fluff. And it's a whole process of judgment, of libration, like the mind of Hamlet. In nature, there is also a last judgment, and it's Saturn's stern. Only some of the seeds make it through winter. Some are eaten by the birds and other animals, the ants. Only some make it through the cold. And it's usually those damn tough weeds. They do it every time. We're told in the Gospels that unless a seed fall into the ground and die, it cannot bear new fruit. We're also told, he who saves his life shall lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake shall save it. We've been saying all along that Hamlet is a very unusual tragedy. In most tragedies, the heroes learn after a series of horrible mistakes. We saw that with Winter's Tale. Hamlet learns all along, and he grows throughout the play. He's an evolutionary hero. And part of that evolution is death, withdrawal, creative improvement. So Persephone and the ethers are withdrawn to the underworld. She lives as queen to Hades Pluto, the god of death and of germinal creativity, right at the very core of the earth. The Earth Mother, whether we call her Demeter or Ceres or Isis, mopes for her lost life. The earth is brown, skeletal, and even the details get covered up with a singular unanimous snow, just smooth. You can't see anything. But where does the creativity come in? That's a more difficult answer. Obviously, there was some creativity before the Christ cycle was initiated. Evolutionary progress has been going on for millions of years on the earth, millions of years before the Christ cycle piggybacked on the cycle of Persephone. But it was always indirect. It was like us hovering outside of our bodies before we can actually come in and do something. It's like an athlete on the sidelines having to watch. You're participating, but not really. Nonetheless, any of us, all of us, who have felt the emptiness, none of us can doubt that reality, that creative reality of the higher cycle. I'm not sure of all of the means. I'm certainly not sure of the ends. But people are doing radical things now to change evolution in a very swift amount of time. Even though we have the creative experience in the emptiness, if we're not careful, we can overlook it. Some people do try to indulge themselves in the emptiness and perpetuate celebration and accomplishment. And when we do that, we miss the new work of creativity. It happens to rock stars all the time. They get on stage and they perform, and everybody in the house gives to them, and they draw from themselves, and they give the very best that they have. But when it's over, they try to stay up. And they do it with drugs, or with sex, or with other kinds of lesser thrills. You can't really blame them if they don't know any better. Emptiness is not a pleasant experience. And we're taught that pleasure and egoism are the very best things. Remorse, or loss, or personal defeat, those are not very well appreciated emotions. But they're important. And they're good because they're like the sifting and the winnowing and the harvesting. And without them, we'll have nothing to eat in the winter. The ways of God are strange to the ways of men. The deepest truths spiritually are more often conveyed in tragedy than in comedy. Plato says that what we call joy and sorrow, or pain and pleasure, he says they're just a subset that are all pain. He says if we're thirsty and we drink, the pleasure of drinking removes the pain of thirst. But he says both the pain and the pleasure are pain relative to true joy or to true pleasure. And that is so different that it can only be experienced in tragedy. As long as we're carried away by comedy and all the trite little happiness of it, we can never peel away the stuff of materialism and get at the true spiritual meaning. On the mandala, the first half begins with Aries in the first house. And it's occupied with the important but little microcosmic life. It's all keyed in the original self-assertion of Aries. The second half begins with Libra and the principle of self-sacrifice. And it leads to the greater cosmic life. The sadness of fall and of Libra are not just due to death and not just due to the reminiscence of all the past glories. If we are listening in the cosmic emptiness of autumn, we can begin to sense the staggering sacrifice of the focus of the life spirit as it takes on the confines of our hardened earth in the being of Christ, to use those words, which is not Jesus. In one way, this is completely antithetical to the nature of the life spirit. The life spirit, as we saw, is pure spirit. It is formless. Our earth is as formed and hard and crystallized as it gets. The life spirit is unconditioned and it's unconditional, where our world is just filled with Saturnine conditions. The life spirit is eternally and perpetually live and new and creative. Things here are old hat. A lot of it is been here, done that. A lot of old people have nothing to do in life anymore because they think they've tired it all out. But at Libra time, at fall, at the autumnal equinox, there's the other side of the life spirit, and that is humility and sacrifice. When we are told in the Gospels that unless a seed fall into the ground and die, it cannot bear fruit, that was a very self-prophetic statement. The life spirit, with all of its life, with all of its creativity, lives by sacrifice. The life spirit is a pure, formless imagination. It provides the potential of imaginings, but not the imaginings themselves. And out of those imaginings come all of the ideas that become eventually all of the forms. That life, that imagination that is beyond even an idea is much more satisfying than fishes and loaves. It's almost impossible to talk about, because when we're talking about the life spirit, we're talking about something that's para-rational or trans-rational, and something that's supra-rational. Therefore, some of the things you say about it have to be senseless, and all we can do is get lower reflections of it in its way that is higher. Earlier we said that the germinal ideas of form, mathematical ideas, were the deepest ideas, the least formal, and the closest to the pure truth of life spirit, which is without form. So let's try to use them as an example. If we try to conceive of a pure imagination that is none of its imaginings, and that is increasingly new and innocent, sort of like a game of peekaboo, it's something like trying to imagine the possibility or the potential of a unique idea without actually producing that idea. That is, it gives birth to a proto-idea by saying it is not that proto-idea. And by rehearsing all of the proto-ideas that it has ever seen before, when it renews itself, it comes to life by saying, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that. And it remains in its purity. But every replication, every rehearsal of all of those ideas enlivens them and gives them life. And that life has a little of the uniqueness of itself, if you can even say it. So the life spirit is live because it gives life by not giving form, even though all form is given out of the potential of its creative activity. Sacrifice. It doesn't need a vindicator. It doesn't need an avenger. All it needs to do is to sacrifice and become itself by not being other things. That's a very shallow and quick rendition of it. But nonetheless, those potential ideas do become ideas. And all the forms and everything else comes out of them. Everything lives because of that sacrifice. It becomes itself, or it becomes greater than itself, and it becomes alive in itself by becoming less than itself. Because the forms do become, and they do get carried out. That's the perfect definition and the perfect example in the most cosmic sense that we can think of humility. Something that becomes greater than itself by becoming less than itself. The entire way that the life spirit functions transcendentally and the way that it functions phenomenally in the incarnation in humanity is the perfect example of humility. And all life, all health in the spirit depends on that kind of humility. Sacrifice is something extremely deep. We as humans try to do something outside of the creation principles. We try to be outlaws. We try to violate the law. We introduce divine disobedience and disorder. And we try to put ourselves outside of the Spirit. And we did, except that we're emaciated, hardening. Without the love shining through and unifying and holding things together, our lives and the whole world are ugly and disruptive and deadly to nature, to ourselves, even to the whole of creation. Because of this internal aberration, a very drastic remedy was called for us to have the possibility of redemption. Because our entire evolutionary ongoing might have been lost. So Christ, as focus of the life spirit, call it Vishnu if you will, entered not only into the potential ideas, but into the ideas and all the way down to the forms of the earth and into a human form. The life spirit wasn't attached to the proto-ideas or the ideas or any of the forms, but because of that non-attachment, it wasn't dulled by them, and the limitation of what otherwise must be a tremendous vibrancy of life, of spiritual life, not vital life, but spiritual life. The consequence of it for us and all of the creatures is that we are directly offered the purest of life, merely for the acceptance of it and living in it as freely as it's offered. Thus, what might have been a premature death is now afforded a creative life, a possibility of redeeming. We've been given a break, a second chance, just as ISIS offers Set a second chance. It's been there all along. This is not a sectarian dogma. We're talking about the reality of the stuff itself. Reality doesn't know Christian or pagan. All we have to do is to accept that reality into our lives. All we have to do is become humble and to become empty. We have egoism with that kind of life, we just burn ourselves up. And the way we do that is by giving. The only way we can empty ourselves. Freely have ye received, now freely give. For the last number of years, we've been talking about the principle of realizing the dream. In the dark, virgin stuff we call matter, which is congealed ignorance. It's the interface of what the universal spirit has not yet awakened in the absolute. It projects its dream, and that assertion draws around it the resistance that is matter, that is the congealment of what we don't know. And we put forth this dream of what it could be, what it might be. And it's when we step inside of the dream and live it out, live it all the way through to the very end, and lay down every last bit of spiritual life that we have, that it gets accomplished. It requires almost unthinkable sacrifice. It requires constant attention. There's nothing left but to be humble and give ourselves to it. All we have to do in this is remember the intuitive light, the light behind the imaginative creation. If we remember that, keep ourselves empty and keep ourselves humble, there is no end to the amount of creation and spiritual fulfillment we can realize. This is what the Christ cycle on top of the cycle of Persephone means. It means that we can consciously participate in all of this. So, in words, we have seen what the big word is. And we have understood a little bit through the understanding of the Christ cycle of what it means to say, greater love hath no man than he lay down his life for his friends. Next time, we will begin a whole new series. We'll start